The bedroom was so quiet I could hear the wick in the oil lamp making a faint little hiss. My new wife sat on the edge of the bed with both hands twisted into the fabric of her nightdress, and when I reached to set my coat over the chair, she flinched as though I had raised my hand. That was the first moment I understood that whatever she had been told about marriage had filled her with more fear than trust. Earlier that evening, an older married man had pulled me aside and told me not to pay attention if she was frightened. He said a husband had rights, and a wife would settle once the night was over. I remember looking at the floorboards while he spoke. I did not answer him then, but before the sun came up, I knew I would have to decide what kind of husband I intended to be. My name is Jonas. I am an Amish husband, a father, and the head of my household. I share these stories because people often see the plain clothes, the horses, and the quiet roads, but they do not always see the decisions made behind closed doors. Some of those decisions shape a marriage for years. If you have ever believed patience can be stronger than authority, I would be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Our wedding day had begun before daylight. It was late autumn, cold enough that the water in the wash basin stung my hands. By 6 a.m, wagons were already coming up the lane. The kitchen smelled of coffee, roasted chicken, and bread that had been baked the day before. There were more than 200 people by the time the service began, though I could not have counted them all. Men stood in one part of the room, women in another, and the benches had been carried in from 3 neighboring homes. My wife Anna was 22. I was 27. We had known each other for almost 3 years, but knowing someone in our community did not mean spending long hours alone with them. We had walked after singing gatherings. We had spoken beside the garden fence while her younger brothers played nearby. I had helped her father repair a shed roof one Saturday, and she had brought us water in a blue enamel pitcher. Our courtship had been quiet and watched, as courtships usually were. Anna was not a timid woman in ordinary life. She could hitch a horse without help. She could carry 2 full milk pails from the barn and never spill enough to wet her shoes. When a storm tore part of the roof from her family's chicken house, she climbed the ladder with her father and held the boards in place while the rain came sideways. But on our wedding day, every time I looked across the room, her face seemed pale. I thought she was tired. Weddings are long in our way. There is the service, the meal, the visiting, the second meal, and more visiting after that. A bride is watched all day. Every movement is noticed. Every smile is answered by another smile. There is almost no private moment to breathe. Near dusk, while the younger men were helping move benches and the women were clearing dishes, a married man from the district came to stand beside me near the woodshed. He was perhaps 15 years older than I was. I respected him then. He had a successful farm, 5 children, and a way of speaking that made younger men feel they ought to listen. He asked whether I was nervous. I told him I was, a little. Then he gave me the advice I have never forgotten. "Do not let her fear change what is owed to you," he said. Those were his exact words. He spoke as if he were telling me how to set a fence post. Firm ground, straight line, do not overthink it. He said women were often frightened because they had been kept innocent, and that a man made matters worse by hesitating. According to him, kindness meant taking control quickly, so there would be less uncertainty. I did not know enough to challenge him. That is the truth. I had been taught many things about work, money, land, scripture, and responsibility. My father had shown me how to judge whether a horse was favoring one leg. My uncle had taught me to sharpen a planer blade until it could lift a curl of maple thin enough to see light through. But no one had sat me down and explained that a wife's fear was not an obstacle to push through. No one had used the word consent. In our community then, such matters were covered in silence, and silence leaves room for harmful advice to sound like wisdom. When the last guests left, the house changed. For hours it had been full of boots, chairs scraping, children whispering, and dishes striking dishes. Then there was only the wind against the siding and the ticking clock in the front room. Anna went upstairs first. I stayed below to bank the stove, though it did not need banking. I checked the latch on the back door twice. I moved a pair of shoes that were already out of the walkway. I was delaying because I could hear that man's words in my head, and because some part of me knew they were wrong even before I could explain why. When I entered the bedroom, Anna was sitting on the edge of the bed. The lamp was on the small table beside her. She had removed her covering, and her hair was pinned loosely at the back of her head. Her shoulders were pulled inward. She did not look at me. I asked whether she was tired. She nodded. I asked whether she was afraid. For several seconds she said nothing. Then her chin trembled once, and she whispered, "I was told I must not say no to my husband." That sentence changed the room. I was still a young man. I had waited for marriage, and I had imagined that night. I will not pretend I had no desire or expectation, but hearing her say those words made every expectation feel small beside the trust she was being asked to place in me. I sat in the wooden chair near the window, not on the bed. I told her I would not touch her unless she wanted me to. She looked up then, but she did not seem relieved right away. She seemed confused. She asked whether I would be angry. I told her no. She asked whether I would tell anyone. I told her no. Then she began to cry. Not loudly. She pressed both hands over her face and cried as quietly as someone who had learned not to be heard. I sat there for a long time. The room had cooled, and I could smell the lamp oil. At some point, I took a quilt from the chest and said I would sleep downstairs. Before I reached the door, she asked me to stay in the room. So I lay on top of the covers on the far side of the bed, fully dressed except for my boots. There was nearly a foot of space between us. I remember staring at a dark knot in the ceiling board until the lamp went out. Nothing happened that night, and that was the most important thing that happened. In the morning, I woke before Anna. Gray light was coming through the curtain. My back hurt from sleeping stiffly, and one of my arms had gone numb under me. For a moment, I felt foolish. Then Anna opened her eyes and looked at me without fear for the first time since the wedding. Trust did not arrive all at once. It came in small pieces over the next weeks. We talked while washing dishes after supper. We sat at the kitchen table after the lamps were lowered. I learned that an older woman had warned her that a good wife endured whatever her husband required. Anna had entered marriage believing fear was proof of obedience. I also had to face what I had been taught. Men in traditional communities are often told that leadership means deciding quickly and being obeyed. But authority without care becomes something ugly. A husband can quote duty and still betray his duty. Providing food, maintaining a farm, and leading prayers mean little if the woman beside you does not feel safe in your presence. Several weeks after the wedding, I saw the man who had advised me. We were stacking lumber in a neighbor's barn. The air was cold enough that our breath showed. I told him I had not followed his advice. He laughed once and asked whether Anna had trained me already. I said no. I decided she was my wife, not my property. My hands shook after I said it. I was not accustomed to speaking that directly to an older man. He frowned and did not answer. We worked beside each other for another hour with almost no conversation. For a while, I wondered whether I had crossed a line by challenging him. That is how strong community pressure can be. You can do the right thing and still feel guilty because the wrong thing was presented as tradition. Anna and I have been married many years now. We have children old enough to notice more than we think they notice. When my sons ask what it means to be a husband, I do not begin with authority. I begin with responsibility. I tell them that strength is not proven by taking what someone is afraid to give. Strength is proven by making it safe for truth to be spoken. I have also spoken differently to my daughters. I tell them marriage does not erase their voice. Respect does not require silence in the face of fear. A good husband will care whether his wife is comfortable, whether she trusts him, and whether her yes is truly hers. I know some people prefer not to speak about these matters. They believe privacy protects holiness. Sometimes privacy does protect what is sacred, but silence can also protect bad teaching. It can allow a frightened bride and an uninformed husband to enter a room carrying instructions that neither one should have been given. When I think back to that first night, I do not remember disappointment. I remember the hiss of the lamp, the cold floor under my stocking feet, and the distance between us on the bed. That distance was not rejection. It was space where trust could begin. What I understand now is simple. Marriage does not turn fear into permission. A wedding promise is not a command to ignore the person you promise to cherish. The first duty of a husband is not to prove that he has authority. It is to make sure his wife knows her safety matters to him. I am grateful I did not listen to the advice I was given. I wish I could say that choice came from perfect wisdom. It did not. It came from seeing fear on the face of the woman I loved and realizing I could either deepen it or stop. That night taught me something I have carried into every hard season of our marriage. Trust grows slowly, but it can be damaged in a moment. A man should never be proud of getting his way if the cost is that his wife becomes afraid to tell him the truth. If these stories from inside Amish family life matter to you, you are welcome to subscribe. I share them because quiet decisions often reveal more about a life than public appearances ever can. And I would like to ask you this: when tradition and compassion point in different directions, which one do you believe a husband should follow?